Today I'm talking with Menno, and you have a very interesting story, and I can't wait for you to share it. So why don't we actually connected over Twitter because you had watched one of my videos and had expressed some similar concerns that I've had about the
Yes.
transgender movement. And so
Yeah.
why don't you, it looks to me like you had showed me some pictures before we started recording that perhaps you were a drag queen at some point,
Well,
or let's just jump in and tell us your story, Menno.
okay, let's start at the very beginning.
Yes.
That's the day that I was born. So
Oh, let's not go back quite that far.
I'll summarize it.
Okay.
So as a child, very sensitive, very much into drawing, singing, art, and that kind of stuff. Not particularly into the traditional boy stuff. I did like
Were
boys
you
things.
gender non-conforming?
Well, we all are.
Yes.
Everyone is. I mean, who is
Thank
the? I was
goodness.
thinking about this yesterday. Who is the epitome of a complete and utter sexist stereotype? I mean, I can think of some. If I think of a man, I think of Daniel Craig, right? James Bond.
Oh.
That to me, like, when he comes out of the water and he's big and buff and he's like, and he's mean. That's kind of like stereotypically manly. But then he got some grief for he carried his child in front of him, and like, I don't know what you call these things. You carry your child in
Uh-huh.
front, and he was slated for that for not being manly. Even
Oh.
James Bond has given in to all the non-manly stuff.
Because
Was
I
was
guess men aren't supposed to bond with their children or something.
Isn't that ridiculous?
Yeah. But
Isn't
you
that
were,
just absolutely ridiculous?
so did
So
you have a difficult time in childhood because you were sort of not conforming to
not
the.
a typical boy. I mean, that's as simple as it is. So I would say I've had a tough time with that for the last 4 decades. And it's only in the last year or so that I've really settled into myself, by accepting myself, who I am, and the kind of guy that I am, and just learning to love myself. I know that sounds very cheesy. RuPaul always says, if you can't love yourself, you can't love anybody else. And it's true. But I ask, how do you do it? Is there a recipe that we can follow? Does this recipe work for everyone? And I don't think there is, but there are key things that we can all do to really learn to love ourselves as people. You don't get there from day one, because first you have to stop hating yourself or disliking yourself. Then you start to learn to like a few things about yourself. Then you start to like yourself as a person. And then that unlocks naturally the love you have for yourself. And I think as part of that, a very important, a key thing in this process is how you relate to your body. And I've always beaten myself up for being too slim and too skinny and for not being able to put on weight in the gym. Although I'm trying, and look at these
Hey,
babies.
those are some
Uh,
good muscles.
it's taken a while, but if I go off on one, just let me know, and I'll try and get back on track. The point is this: learn to love yourself, and as part of that, you learn to love your body. And I think one thing that we are unlearning, or we're not learning to love our bodies anymore for what our bodies are, because on social it's all about filters, and it's all about, you have to look this way, you have to look that way, and surgery is going through the roof in terms of plastic surgery. It's all about not accepting ourselves anymore. And I think it's quite interesting because we seem to make this distinction between who we are and our bodies, whereas we're one and the same. We
That
are
that's so
our
that's what's
bodies.
so strange about the transgender movement is this separation of that you can somehow be different, be a fundamental different spirit being than what
Yes,
your body is, which is just
yes.
it's such a I think
And
it's a dangerous ideology.
the key word you said there, for me, the key word is disconnect. It's a disconnection. And that's why we'll go into that later. What I think is happening now and what's concerning me so much is I would call it a cultural lobotomy. Not, some people call it grooming, but I think it's more severe. It's a lobotomy. Mm. They're actually going in with a little ice pick into our brains and the little hammer, and tick, that's one more connection gone. And tick, that's one more connection gone. And each tick, if you like, represents where do we engage cognitive dissonance? Where do we start willingly suspending our disbelief and accept certain things? They're very small things and it's very gradual. But the more you accept, there's a quote that I saw the other day. You promote what you permit.
Huh. Interesting.
So even if it's just a small thing, if you let it slide, you're inviting in the next thing. You know, you kind of go a bit further down, and then it's harder to backtrack because you've allowed something else.
Right.
And it reminds me of a story my granddad used to tell my mum when she was a child. He told her a story about a man who lived in a hut, and one day a camel came round and looked through the window and said, "Oh, that's a nice little hut." And then the man said, "Yes, isn't it? Would you like to come and have a look inside?" Okay, so the camel just, he opens the door, and then the camel just puts the head through the door and goes, "Oh, nice, nice. Yes, very nice place you've got there." And the man goes, "Oh, thank you very much." And then the camel goes, "Do you mind if I just step in?" "No, of course not. Why? Why not? Come in. Yes, welcome." Kindness, you see?
Kindness, acceptance.
Kindness and acceptance and openness. Or shall we say, camel inclusivity.
Yes.
So the camel then says, "Oh, do you mind if I put another leg in?" "No, no, no, no." "Oh, come in." Anyway, then the camel just goes in completely. And then the two of them are in the little hut, and it's a bit cozy together. And then the camel says, "It's a bit tight, isn't it, the two of us?" "Yes," says the man. And then the camel says, "Do you mind stepping outside for a bit?"
Just give me a little room.
Just give me a little room. Absolutely. And that's how the man loses his house. And I think there was a film last year, a Korean film, or was it this year, that won an Oscar called Parasite, which is a similar sort of storyline where people enter a house and then kind of drive out the people who own it. And this is kind of what I'm seeing happening here in terms of being able to identify your way into anything you like.
And I think that is such a great analogy because especially when it comes to women's bathrooms, locker rooms, sports, it is that idea of, oh, we'll just be kind. You know, there's just one person. There's just this one trans person who wants to come in. Let's be kind. And now we're to the point where people, any male can say he identifies as female and have access to women's spaces.
Because you no longer have to actually transition. You now have non-transitioning trans people. It's like, wait, stop. Trans means
transitioning.
Like there's one descriptor I read a few years ago, and it just kind of made me go a bit, huh? But I didn't think much of it. I just thought, this is weird stuff and it's got nothing to do with me. But as a gay man, I am automatically part of the LGBTQIA2+ community. And it's kind of like if you're in a company and a new team member joins, there's a little introduction, you know, "Hi, this is Harry. Harry used to work here. Now Harry's going to do this job here." And everyone say, "Welcome to Harry." "Hi, Harry." But as a gay man, and lesbians have the same, it's like who are these people that keep joining? You know, it's if this is our house, the house of LGBT+, extensions keep getting built. And it's like, but wait, where's the planning permission, you know? Or when was this talked about? It hasn't been consulted. Who are these people? We don't understand their descriptors. And first you're like, well, all they are that we have in common is that they're not straight.
Maybe.
Maybe, exactly. You can't even say that anymore these days. So I read an article, this is a few years ago, where somebody described themselves as non-binary transmasculine. And I went, whoa, wait a second. Okay. And then I've met trans people in my life. I've had nice conversations with them. I've worked with them. And to me, trans meant you're transitioning. And trans means from one to the other. You know, that's why we say transatlantic flight, transport, transition. It goes from one to another. So how can you say that you're non-binary, but you're trans? Because
Well, and the other problem with that is that when you take a transatlantic flight, you do go from one continent to another. However, when you transition, you don't go from male to female. You go from maybe male to presenting as a more, female externally, but you don't actually change. And so I think that might be the nose of the camel that we let in, is this idea that you can transition. That was sort of the nose that got in, and then once the nose was in, the rest of the camel came.
I've prepared something about that, so I'll
Oh,
grab that in a
excellent.
second. But in terms of the non-binary trans masculine person, I thought, okay, if we just unpack that just briefly, you've got non-binary, which means you're neither male or female, which is physically impossible,
Right.
Or biologically impossible, or you're both at the same time. Okay, but you say you're trans.
So if you're both, what are you transitioning to?
That means you identify as what you are not. Okay, but you can't identify as what you are not when you are either both or neither. Also, they then said, I'm non-binary trans masculine. Now that's a very binary term. So trans is a binary term, and masculine is the most binary term in terms of how you present yourself. So my question is this: if you're non-binary, why are you dealing in binaries?
Right. And why would you have to do any kind of transition if you're non-binary? Because we're all inherently sort of non-binary when it comes to gender.
Look, another thing about this is, I like to know about you as a person, not the labels you stick on yourself. And I think as gays and lesbians particularly, we wanted to get rid of the labels, whereas now it's all about the labels. I mean, if you think that non-binary transmasculine is convoluted, there's longer descriptors now. There was somebody who said, well, I am asexual, pangender, non-binary, trans, this and that. And it's like, look, how many stickers do you want? How many badges do you want? Is that because you're hiding who you are and you need all this superficial stuff? Because all these descriptors don't tell us anything about you as a person. Same, I'm a gay man. It doesn't tell you much. If you ask me, how would you describe yourself? I would say, well, I like to think I'm a very curious, inquisitive person. I have a very thirsty brain. You know, it always wants more information. I like to understand things. And I love language. That's where actually one of the angles that I'm coming at this from, about clear language. And when I started, as they say, peaking last year. So language, just say what you mean.
I want to clarify, by peeking, you don't mean like peeking into the tent. You mean trans peaking, which is like you sort of hit the point where you're like, wah!
Yes. And I hit that point in February this year, but it kind of started last year at Pride in London. And I didn't exactly understand what was happening, especially in February. It's only recently that I came across this term, about a month ago. And it gave me an moment, because it just helps to put a name to something and put it in perspective. Now, for a non-binary transmasculine person, they might get that same feeling when they read that descriptor. So it's important to be able to recognize that other people experience that for something that they agree with. Reaching peak trans doesn't mean that from that moment on, you no longer have compassion for trans people, and that you can't have friendships with trans people, which I do. and that you can have a really nice time with trans people. Because why not? Because we are people. And this is one thing that I really want to emphasize when talking about these things, that we, you know, you're, I'm assuming, a heterosexual lady.
For the most part. Although I could identify as bi if I wanted to, and I could, when I was younger, identify as lesbian. So yeah,
Okay.
I don't know. I generally at this point in my life identify as heterosexual, but according to these labels, I could definitely pull some others off the tree based on my history.
But whichever label you pull off the tree, we are all people. You know what it's like to feel rejected, or accepted. You know what it's like to feel lonely. You know what it's like to feel hurt. You know what it's like to belong and to not belong, or to feel like a freak. All these things we can relate to one another on that level, and this is the higher level. Whereas what I feel with all the trans stuff, it keeps getting pulled down to a very base level where it's just about anger, and it's just about her, and it's
And
about
speech and what you say and how you
you
look
hate
at, yeah, it's,
you're spreading hate, and choose love. It's like there's more to life than love and hate.
well, and
Or
it's this like, choose love, you're hateful. And it's like, whoa,
yes, yes.
this is a mixed message we're getting here.
Well, absolutely, it doesn't make any sense, and it's you know, if you want to call it a discourse, it's at such a base level. But part of that is because of the influence of identity politics, and that goes back to all the labels. It's no longer about who you are as a person, it's about what club you belong to. And with the membership of the club come requirements and expectations. That's why it's okay to say now that if what's his name, Kanye West, supports Trump, there was a black man who then said that he's no longer black.
Right. Isn't that
That's
fascinating? I mean,
that's identity politics. The same was said for the guy who, I don't know what his exact role is, whether he's the founder or the CEO of PayPal, but he's a billionaire gay man. I definitely want his number. And he supported a Republican. And then another gay man said, well, he may sleep with men, but he's not gay.
see, that's so interesting because I'm seeing that gay police officers are no longer part of the club, that they've been rejected from the
Okay.
LGBTQ here in the US, that police officers are now, you know, because all cops are bad cops, all cops are bastards, whatever.
Right.
So
Don't find
now
it.
they're no longer part of the club here in the US.
Right. So in England, it's the other way around. It's where the police go out at Pride and take part in the Pride parade. Um, but it's interesting how the focus has shifted from who you are as a person and your inner qualities and what you can contribute to this world, to what labels you stick on it that don't say anything about who you are, but about what club you are a member of. And as a gay man, I am automatically member of the LGBT plus club.
At
And then,
least you are until maybe after this interview, you might get kicked out.
well, I've already experienced being shunned in a way, or at least being ticked off. So one evening, I was hanging out with a bunch of gay guys, a social thing, and this is all that was said. Me and one of the guys that I got on really well with, we sort of had I can't remember how we came to it, but we mentioned the tensions that we feel exist within the LGBT plus community, and that there are fractures that are tearing us apart as a community. And very naturally, that moved on to the trans thing. And all I said was this. I said, I've looked into this, and I can see that trans people among themselves do not agree on various definitions. And you have trans people canceling trans people. And especially the non-binary trans people really going for the trans people who are actually physically and socially transitioning. So one example is Counterpoints. Their name is Natalie Wynn, but on YouTube, they're massive. They're called Counterpoints, and they make the most amazing videos. Really elaborate, gorgeous looking videos. Natalie was born a boy. You can't say that, but this is where I'm like, stop. Okay, that's where the camel stays out. You were born a boy. And see, this is what I find so interesting when you go back to they are a person, as in a human being. Everyone has a story. And their story is, the little that I know about it, that they were born a boy, but they liked makeup and the girly stuff, as I did to a large degree. And then they felt that, oh, that's not right because I'm a boy, so I shouldn't like these things. And then this is where I start to wonder how much of this is an innate identity thing that's coming out, and how much of this is just around the socialization and the stereotypes. And I feel that all my life, I've been fighting these stereotypes. The reason I've been bullied as a child to the point where at 7 I was suicidal is because I wasn't a boy. It's because I didn't like sports and I was scared of the ball, and all my friends were girls. And, you know, they would beat me up. And then on the way home, I would have to take a different route, even though I just lived 5 meters, almost 5 minutes away. As a teenager, the homophobic abuse came in, actually, again, beatings, name calling. The name calling has continued. Even last week, I got called a name in the street where I live. So, and all that is because I don't fit a particular. I'm not a blokey bloke, and
Well,
that's all. That's
But
all
what
they.
makes me so sad is that you went through all that, and now instead of saying we need to stop this kind of harassment of people who are gender nonconforming,
Mhm.
the new narrative is, well, you just become a girl and then it'll be okay.
It's you've said this or other people that you've spoken to have said the same thing. It's now about reinforcing the stereotypes, but in a very negative, black and white, rigid way. I've come out the other end by, as I said at the beginning, really working on myself and learning to love myself, and now being in a really good place and not being bothered by those so-called expectations or wanting to fit in with it, and just be who you are, because there's only one of you. So Judy Garland once said, be a first-rate version of yourself rather than a second-rate version of somebody else. I would say be a first-rate version of yourself rather than a second-rate version of a regressive sexist stereotype. Love yourself. And especially, that's such a big thing to have in your life. You know, life's going to throw lots of stuff at you. But when you have that to anchor you, you can deal with so much. And just to go back to Counterpoints or Natalie Wynn, I'm saying this because this is what they've said in one of their videos. I'm not making this up or being an amateur psychologist, I guess. But they said they thought something was wrong because they liked the things that they shouldn't be liking. And they started to identify as genderqueer. I have no idea what that means. I guess it just means you're not a typical boy, you know, in plain English. And then that sort of developed into identifying as trans. Natalie thought, oh, I must be a woman inside. So they started to transition. Now, they had always been attracted to girls, but when they started to transition, they started going for guys.
Oh,
not because they wanted to, but because they felt they had to. Because what is more womanly than getting a man?
Interesting.
And it's very interesting how quite a few trans women that I see online on dating apps and stuff, they want a man. They don't want a gay man.
They want a straight
necessarily.
man
They want
because
a
a
straight
straight
man
man reinforces this mythology that they've actually become a woman.
that they have become a woman. It's the ultimate validation. And this is where I think, wait a second. So here we have from the trans community, and by that I don't mean every single person in it. I mean all that noise that's coming that
It's
says
the ideology, just the ideology that's being pushed.
that gay men have to accept trans men in their dating pool, whether that trans man has now transitioned or not. And if we don't do that, we're homophobic. So this morning or yesterday, a gay man has just been banned off Twitter for simply saying that that's wrong, that you shouldn't force a gay man to go with a trans man or
Who is
a
actually a
lesbian with
female.
a trans woman with a penis, right? So he said, well, you can't do that. That's a new form of homophobia. And that was enough to get him canceled of
Wow.
Twitter.
And it's
So
so interesting to me that it's hitting in the gay community, because lesbians have been having to deal with this for a while, where they have been told that if they
they,
discriminate against a
yeah,
female who happens to have a penis, that they're being transphobic and not accepting that person. And so there's
you're
even
not
something
a
called
you're
the
not a
cotton
female who happens
ceiling.
to have a penis. You
Pardon?
don't happen to have a penis.
No.
This is where I push back. I'm like, you don't happen to be a female with a penis, okay? And sorry, I'm going a bit all over the place, but I just want to bring it back to Natalie Wynn counterpoints. She started dating guys because she felt she had to, because that fits the picture. But then she realized, oh, that's not what I like, and met a woman and fell completely in love with the woman, which was a big thing, and then came out as a lesbian. Now, that's
uh,
taking it to a whole other level. But what I found so interesting about that story, and she was talking a little about the shame that she felt, and that she felt more shame for coming out as a lesbian than as a trans woman. Now, I would say that you're not a lesbian because you are male and you were always attracted to women. So you're a straight male who has transitioned. And I'll get slated for this, but fine, whatever. I'm not intimidated by that stuff. What was the point I was going to make? Nah, I forgot. But but you mentioned something earlier that I wanted to address anyway, which is language and the idea that you can change your sex, right? Because that's what all this comes down to. And you know that mantra, trans women are women. And I think this is sort of shorthand, but people have forgotten what it's shorthand for. So the long version is trans women are men who want society to perceive them as women. Okay? Okay. And I think society generally, I know there's abuse going on, but generally with the changes in law and protections that they have, we're accommodating. We've accommodated the trans camel, if you like. But to now actually forget that that was the long form, and to now to say, well, trans women are women, as in literally they are. This is where it went wrong in the pub when I was with that group of guys. And I said, look, even trans people don't disagree. So counterpoints, okay, see, it's all making sense. It's all coming together. Counterpoints was given a lot of abuse by particularly non-binary trans people, because Counterpoint said, look, I'm transitioning medically through cross-sex hormones and surgically through facial feminization surgery, and obviously, some other bits and bobs. So the non-binary trans folk were saying, are you saying that you can only be trans if you medically and surgically transition? And there's a word for that. Have you ever heard of true scum?
yes, there's true scum and too cute or
Transmedicalist.
yeah,
That's the other thing.
there's this war between them, between the ones who say, if you're really transgender, you have to medically transition, versus those who
Yes.
say,
True
I can,
scum.
I could say that I'm a man just right now. I could say
Yeah,
that I'm a man. And if you don't respect that, you're transphobic.
exactly. It's that easy. I mean, the bar's been lowered so much. Everyone is trans and everyone's transphobic. I'm trans, according to the latest definitions, just by the fact that sometimes or in the past, I've done drag. Just by the fact that I don't see myself as a stereotypical man and masculine in a stereotypical way, which by definition means I'm not cis. But whenever I talk about this, people go, oh, look at that white cis guy talking with his white cis privilege. They just want to have something to throw at you, right? So
Well, and
according
what
to
it
that,
reminds me of, going back to the camel, is it's almost like the camel's looking around the tent now and saying, I got a really nice tent. And the guy's on the outside saying, hey, wait, it's mine. The camel's like, no, it's not. This is mine. This is
you're
my house.
camophobic. You're camophobic.
Yeah, you're camophobic. Like, this was mine. So, and
Right.
that's really concerning, because the person on the outside now has been completely disenfranchised, and is likely going to have the cops called on him, because the camel's going to say, this guy's trying to break into my house.
Absolutely. You couldn't have put it better. So, yes. So my point was in that conversation with the guys in the pub, if trans people can't agree, then how are we supposed to make sense of it? And I named a couple of people. So there's Christina J. Harrison, who campaigns a trans woman, but they say very clearly, there's a talk that she does on YouTube that you can find where she says, in the 20 years that I've lived like this, I've never had to pretend that biological sex doesn't exist. Couldn't be clearer. Buck Angel, a trans man, just this week was interviewed for a podcast, and he says, I'm a trans man, which means I will always be female. I am female. I have a female past, but I want society to see me as a man and treat me as a man. That's the kind of dude I am.
Well, and if
Okay.
if he was in fact a man, then he wouldn't be transgender.
Exactly. Well, if he wasn't female.
Right.
Right. And he says this, he says, if you deny biology and the reality of it, then you're taking away our transness. Stop doing it. Now he's engaging with a lot of, I think, the younger trans, especially the trans guys on his Instagram and saying, kids, stop this nonsense, stop fighting, stop screaming. Biological sex is real. So there's Buck Angel, who's speaking up. There's Christina J. Harrison. There's Debbie Hayton, who's a trans woman who's also a scientist or a science teacher. And she actually wrote an article called The Word Woman is Already Taken.
Oh, wow.
And she wore a t-shirt that said, trans women are men. Get over it. So she's now been accused of hate speech, and she's a pariah. So there's Christina J. Harrison. I'm just naming these names so that people know we're not just making this up and saying some people are saying this. No, these are real people. Christina J. Harrison, Buck Angel, Debbie Hayton. Then we have Blair
White, yes.
And Rose of Dawn, who is a trans woman in the UK. And Rose of Dawn, again, is more like, I'm a transsexual, like your guest that you had, the lonely transsexual, Zia. And that always kind of brings a smile to my face because I really like fairy tales. And whenever I've seen the lonely transsexual on Twitter before, and it just makes me think of like a high tower somewhere far away on a tiny little island and nobody can get there. And she's up in a tower on her own, just a lonely transsexual.
Oh.
Tweeting and people giving her grief for saying, I am male. Now, that kind of brings us back to, can you change your sex? And it's not a surprise, I think, that people are confused about this. And that now that we're saying, well, you can't, that people are going, wait a second, yes, you can. So if we have a look back at 1931, Lily Albee, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, she was, well, a man and transitioned to be a woman. And even this language I'm using now, pay attention to that, right? Because already I'm using the language that now has made everything so confusing. And a film was made about her life called The Danish Girl, right? So she was one of the first people to have gender reassignment or sex reassignment, whatever they call it. There were complications, and she even wanted to have like an ovary put in or something like that. This was all very experimental, complications, and she died because of those surgeries. What was interesting is after her death, a book was published, and this was the title of the book, From Man to Woman. So that suggests it's possible, okay? Then in 1953, a guy called Ed Wood made a film called Glenn or Glenda. And on the posters, it's very exploitational, sensationalist. It goes, I changed my sex. What am I, male or female? The strange case of a man who changed his sex. So we're being fed this idea that it's correct.
That started back in the 30s. So a lot of us are sort of thinking this is very new, but this sort of misinformation campaign started way back.
Well, it's the language.
It's the
It's the
language.
language that was used that puts the idea into your head that you can become a man or a woman if you started at the other end.
Well, and I'm guessing
Um,
back in the 30s, they didn't use the term gender. I think that the use of the term gender is relatively new. And so it's
right.
almost like they talked about changing sex, and then we came up with this term gender and realized that
Yes.
people could be gender nonconforming. And then we sort of did this swap out where suddenly sex became gender and gender became sex. So you talk about someone being assigned male at birth or assigned female at birth. And
Yes.
now all of a sudden it's like, yeah, I know. But now all of a sudden it went from being gender to sex again. So we did this like funny swap out and nobody was really paying attention.
It's very odd. But I think one of the roots of it is, and the confusion is that with this language, like we had the examples just gave you, but also in 1967, there was a man who went to Denmark and had a sex change. The word was sex change then. So again, you're saying you can change your sex. It's literally a sex change, even though what you're doing is you're only changing the appearance. So now, right, and the headlines in the newspaper were like, surgery makes an XGI a girl. So a man can become a woman, a guy can become a girl. So these concepts get embedded in our brains, even when we're not paying attention to it. We have the word sex change, we have the word transsexual, which again says you can change your biological sex. And this is not the case. And why is this not the case? Well, that's just basic biology. And then they'll go, what about intersex people? I've got 3 pages of explanations for all that. But anyway, I think this is how the idea got in that you can change your sex, even though in the real world, sex is immutable. And when we accept people who say, I am a woman, when they are a man, we're not going to go up to them and go, you're a man, you will always be a man. No, you know, ideally, we're all respectful and kind, and we call you your new name. So I would call Zia Zia, and if Zia wants me to call her and she, then I will do that. But that's based on kind of like a respect that you have for someone, and that's kindness, and that's compassion. And then as you said, you know, even Buck Angel, he said he saw this coming about 5 years ago, when there was this shift, and suddenly it was all about gender, whereas gender before referred to your sex or sex roles that people that society basically expects you to fit in with. And so many people have not fit in with those stereotypes for forever. But
Well, that's
suddenly
why
it's
when
a
you
new
talk about
thing.
cis, I think a lot of us bristle
Yeah.
because, ugh, are you
But,
saying that I have to identify as Barbie in order to like, I mean, and that's where,
well,
and especially someone like me who had gender dysphoria as a child, it's really like, oh,
right.
I definitely don't feel comfortable with this label that you've put on me. And it's interesting to me that they can put labels on us. You know, you're
Yes.
not gay because you did this. You're not Black because you did
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
You are
Yeah.
cis. But then at the same time, they're so insistent that we respect the labels that they want for themselves.
Yes. This ideology and the people who subscribe to it, it's full of contradictions. The thing cannot stand on its own 2 feet or legs, and that's why you know there's something going on. And there is a much bigger picture here that goes beyond all the pronouns and what's a man, what's a woman. It goes beyond all that, and it's very sinister. But we'll get to that. It's interesting with the cis thing because I spent a weekend with 2 trans women recently, where we had a lovely weekend, 2 days. The first day I was just with my friend, and then the next day another friend of ours visited. And I said something, and she just went, yeah, very casually, like, yeah, that's because she's cis. And I went, I'm not cis. And she said, well, it just means you're not trans. Ah, okay. Here's the camel. This is where you don't let it pass, even in a friendly conversation. And you put up your hand and you say no. And I did. It was a bit awkward because, and this was interesting because this was her perception of it. She's like, oh, it just means you're not trans, you know, so it's just linguistically helpful. All right, you know what I said earlier about the lobotomy? There's the little pig and the hammer.
Yeah.
This language only applies if you subscribe to the ideology of gender. It's a school of thought. That's me being polite, I guess, because that makes it sound philosophical
Yeah,
rather
I
than
would
as
say it's more a religious ideology, really.
right. So I'm not Muslim, therefore I don't describe myself by Muslim terms.
Right.
I would never say, hi, my name is Menno and I'm an infidel, right?
Right.
Or I would not say, I used to be Christian, but not anymore. And that was part of what was hard for me to deal with, being gay and Christian and all that kind of stuff. I was also excommunicated from a so-called spiritual organization for being gay. So that in my life, there's been a lot of stuff that I've had to deal with because I'm gay. Not the gayness from within me that made it a problem, but the reaction of the outside world. I've learned to deal with that. And that's what I would like to pass on to others. Love yourself, unpack your story.
But
Sorry.
also
Okay.
accept yourself, and I think forcing other people to perceive you in a way that isn't truthful is really dangerous. And that's my
Right.
concern about it is love
What is
yourself, but
authentic,
also
right?
don't force other people to assume your
Yeah.
ideology.
So she said, you're cis, it just means you're not trans, but that's not what it means.
Oh,
But that's how a lot of people interpret it, and that makes it sound very harmless, right? It's just harmless. Hey, no, it's cis refers to your gender identity. If you believe that you have one,
right,
because I don't. I'm just a guy with a personality,
right,
as we all are, just people with personalities. But from the gender identity ideology crowd, they think that we all have an innate gender identity, a sense of whether you are male or female. I know I'm a guy because I'm a guy, because I know what's in my pants. It's not just about the genitals. Yes, it is. Because you're
the
either male or
chromosomes
female.
and the chromosomes and the physiology, and there's a whole lot to it.
Chromosomes, the genes,
The
the
gene.
hormones, whatever. It's fascinating when you look into this, especially into intersex, and that you can have men who have two XY chromosomes, and yet they develop as men. Why do we still call them men? Because they have a male reproductive system. It's very simple. We are mammals. I've got some notes for this. Where's my mammal's notes? Right, we're mammals. As a species, we are mammals. We're not the only mammals in this world. There's plenty of others. And mammals come in two forms.
Male and female.
Male and female. Why? Because we produce through sexual reproduction and specifically internal fertilization. And how you have a sperm and an egg. They come together, boom.
And if you make sperm, you're a guy. And if you have an egg, you're a girl. I mean,
you're a girl.
It's pretty straightforward.
It's pretty straightforward. What we also know in life is that once you produce sperm, you're never going to switch to producing eggs.
Right, right.
Once you have the eggs, and the eggs you have from birth, you don't produce them throughout your life, you're never going to switch to making sperm, because that means that your ovaries have to change into testicles. Because that's interesting, right? When the in the womb, the baby, if you like, develops into male or female, what becomes ovaries in the female become the testicles in the male. And it's so interesting when you talk to people about this, they've never heard of the word gamete.
Oh.
I mean, I hadn't heard of that until I started looking into this, and yet they think that they know everything. They've never even heard of the word gamete. And that's why when they say, there is no sex binary because of intersex, but intersex people don't produce a third gamete.
Right.
That's the question to ask. Show me the third gamete.
Right.
There isn't one. Sperm, egg, come together, magic. So if you look at other mammals, also interesting, intersex people are infertile because it's a natural variation that they were born the way that they were, which is all about biology. It's the biology that drives their entire intersex condition.
Right.
It's interesting when trans people use the intersex card, when that actually disagrees with what they're saying and proves them wrong in two ways. One, it says it reinforces the binary, because most intersex people still clearly fall within male or female, even if their chromosomal makeup is not is XY or XX, right? You have something called the La Chapelle syndrome, which sounds like the fabulously glamorous one, but it comes with all sorts of health issues, which is where, you know, you have the two X sex chromosomes, but they have a sneaky gene. There is a sneaky gene that was passed over through the sperm by the dad. And the sneaky gene basically triggers the XX person to develop male. So they develop testicles, they develop a penis, they develop a prostate, and their appearance is male, you know, their body develops male, but they're infertile. So they don't produce sperm. Now, we earlier said you either produce sperm or eggs. So now some people might jump on this saying, well, they don't have sperm, so are you saying they're not human? And this is where it's like, oh.
Well, and that's where it's important to note that intersex is a developmental, I don't want to call it disorder because that's now one of those buzzwords that you can't use.
Yes.
But it's a variation, and we don't
Mm-hmm.
tend to judge things based on variation. I mean, there are people who are born without legs, but we still consider ourselves bipedal.
Yes.
You know, I mean,
or 6 fingers, you know?
Right, exactly. And one of the things that I think is important about the cis designation is that it takes you from being a male to being a subset of a male.
Yes, and this is why it's so insidious and pernicious, because what it's doing, and this was done on purpose by some kind of, you know, queer theorist person who basically said, oh, it's linguistically helpful. And then, you know, the people who support the cis thing, they're like, oh, well, you know, it's been around forever. It comes from Latin and it just means on the same side. That's all it means. And it's like, well, wait a second. It's from chemistry and a particular branch of chemistry. And all you've done is appropriate it, but in a disingenuous way, to say that, no, there are no men and women. Men and women are umbrella terms. And underneath the woman one, you have cis women and trans women. Because if you have women and trans women, then trans women suddenly sounds like, that's different. It's maybe not as real, you know, the word real, because it's all about this validation stuff. And it's like, you know, I think of it as tea. It may sound a bit silly, but I just got these, right? Can you see that?
Chamomile.
Right, and
green tea.
Okay, so I once had a meeting with a guy who runs a specialty tea company, right? And we're talking about tea, and I said, and then I ordered some. I said, actually, I'll go and order some chamomile tea. And he said, that's not tea.
Oh.
And I'm like, oh, okay.
Herbal
so what
tea.
is it then? But even herbal tea is not tea because it has no tea leaves in it.
That's a good point. I mean,
so what is it? It's an infusion. Okay, that's why on this pack it says
infusion.
So
that's actually an interesting point that you make, because I live in Utah, which you may or may not be aware of, is sort of the heart of the Mormon Church. And the Mormon Church, they have very strict regulations about tea and coffee. And yet, there's this debate about whether or not they can drink chamomile tea, because is it tea? Does it fall under that umbrella? So again, it's that precision of language that can get very muddled when you start allowing one thing to be called another thing that it actually isn't.
Right, and then you can say to me, oh, but it is chamomile tea, and if you have to say it's an infusion, you're just being a tea snob, or you know, you're being anal. And I'm like, well, whatever. But this is where, for me, last year, I slowly started to peak. Or the beginning, it started. So I was at Pride, and I was talking to 2 trans women who were, I think, in their late 60s, early 70s. So they were, you know, a bit older, and they both had signs that said, proud to be trans. And I went up to them, we had a nice little chat, and to me, they were clearly men in dresses. But I don't go up to them and go, you're a man in a dress, I can tell. I mean, it's so obvious. And this is the thing, you know, with men and women, we're so different by nature. And that's a very important phrase. I'll repeat, we're different by nature. We can all tell. Apparently, babies can tell after 3 months who is
Right.
male and female. I mean, we've been on this planet for how many millions of years? It's, I think it comes from, it's an evolutionary thing that you can just tell. Why? Because the only way that we can continue life is for the sperm to meet the egg. Okay, so males look for females and females look for males. And some tests were done, and this has been replicated around the world, and the same results come up, that apparently when women are ovulating, they are more attracted to more masculine men. And if, God, there was a really interesting talk I watched about this, and it kind of shows you how much of our behavior is down to evolution and how we've evolved into very complex beings. But now people are like, no, this is me as a person.
Well,
And
it's
it's
almost
very,
like people are just pissed off about biology. I mean, I hear that, there's some women who I feel like, they're blaming the patriarchy for everything. And I'm probably going to get in trouble for this. But a lot of, women's roles in society are not due to patriarchy. It's due to biology.
look,
That we're the
if,
ones who carry the babies and deliver them and
yes.
nurse them. And so
Now,
there are sex roles that developed around that is based on biology and not some kind of ideology.
right. And certain human behaviors, um, I'm, I'm not sure how much is down to the socialization, because socialization is so powerful. We should never underestimate how powerful these sexist stereotypes are, and how people can doubt themselves and feel like they're trapped in the wrong body.
Well, and
Okay.
part of that is saying that perhaps males are more inclined to be this way, and perhaps females are more
Yes.
inclined to be this way.
Men are
But
more
let's
aggressive, men are more
accept that.
violent.
Yeah, let's accept. I mean, for people who want to accept diversity, they're doing sort of a bad job of it, because they're saying if you deviate from this, then you're actually the opposite of what you actually really are. So it's almost like rather than celebrating the diversity of how people can express their sex
Right.
in all different ways, they're saying,
Yep.
no, we're going to pigeonhole you, and you better, you're
Yeah.
either this or this, and if you don't act a certain way, then it means you're something else.
Right. Now, there's a reason for that, and it's got nothing to do with human rights or people being themselves, but we'll get to that. Um, so we were talking about mammals born in the wrong body. Right. So this is when I say, once you've peaked, it doesn't mean that, as I said earlier, you don't have compassion and you can't be friends with people who are trans, because again, see them as humans, see them as the human. What is the story? You had a very clear story about why you had gender dysphoria as a child, and you described there was an assault that took place just before you went to first grade. And here's a question that I think is a good question to ask anyone dealing with any kind of mental health issues. What would you say? What are friends for?
Hmm. That's a really good question. And I probably would have answered it really differently a couple of years ago. But for me right now, friends are sort of help keep me on track, to,
Right.
just to kind of be there as buffers or scaffolding or whatever you want to call it. I sort of see myself, as a bowling ball going down the lane, and
Yeah.
friends are sort of the buffers that you can put up when you're a little kid so that they don't go in the gutter.
Yeah. So they are there to support you.
Hmm.
Fair. Well, I think most people see it that way. That's what friends are for. So if your dysphoria was your friend, what was your friend trying to help you with?
Well, in my case, it was trying to help me feel safe,
To protect you from.
protect me. Yeah,
Right.
in my
And,
mind.
right. So
And yet I realize now that in fact it would have done the opposite, because if I had been affirmed, I would
yeah.
have been allowed to go into men bathrooms and possibly been at far greater risk of a future sexual assault, because here I am, a little girl going into men's spaces.
Yeah.
So the dysphoria wasn't a very good friend, really.
Right. So, but this is where it's important to look at your story. What was the story you're telling yourself? And with, if somebody chooses the path of transitioning, that's obviously their choice. And with the two trans women that I spent the weekend with, we had a very nice time. But I did want to find out a bit more about their stories. And what was really nice is that what the three of us have in common is all this confusion. Oh my God, who am I? For me, in terms of sexuality, for them, in terms of gender identity. The difference is I don't need to take drugs or have surgery to live my life as a gay man. And they both have gone down that route. One of them has lived like that for 20 years and is very settled in it. But what was interesting, obviously, we're in lockdown, not as strict as before here in the UK, but the one, she gets the cross-sex hormones through a little implant under the skin. It's like a little grain of rice, and over a year, it just releases the hormone. Because we're in lockdown now, she can't get the implant. So she's on something else called patches that releases the hormones, but it works slightly differently and the body responds differently to it. And she's noticed her fat distribution is changing.
Oh.
And earlier I said, what we need to do is learn to love our bodies. And when you say that biology is almost being denied, our bodies have so much wisdom. Our bodies know so much. And our mental state and how we feel is so much down to actually what goes on in our stomachs and our digestive system.
Yeah, those bacteria that are making all kinds of neurotransmitters and stuff.
All that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So to think that you are just what you think you are or what you feel, to me, is incredibly arrogant. So my friend in lockdown feels that the dysphoria is being triggered again, which again brings down the fact that for people who transition medically and surgically, it's a treatment. But now it's like it's made to sound like it's some inner ethereal soul-like quality. And this is why they use the children. And I say use the children because it's not about the children for them. It's about being able to say, if we can claim that children are trans, you know, they use the phrase trans kids and trans children, which I think is incredibly dangerous. They're trying to claim that it's the innocence of the children that's going to justify everything. And therefore, these adults, I'm not saying this is every single trans person, they can then use the kids as pawns to get the legal rights that they want.
Right.
There's something more sinister to this, where the ones who are shouting the most about you can identify into anything you like are also the ones who tend to support lowering the age of consent for kids to have sex.
Right.
So there's a whole underbelly here. And this is why I say you need to be specific with your language and know which language you're using. And we're going back to this, you promote what you permit, because if you go along with the language, that's part, the vocabulary that's part of this ideology, then you're helping embed it into daily life.